I want to share with you two stories from the summer and another poem. First, in August, I flew up to Minneapolis to perform the wedding for a young couple that spent many years here in Durham and found a Jewish home here at Beth El for many years. The bride's family was Russian, recent immigrants to the United States. At the wedding reception, while people sang and danced, her father sat next to me and told me his family story. The bride's father was 5 years old in June 1941. They lived in Latvia. And when Germany started bombing the area on the first day of the war, his father's family faced a decision: stay or leave. It might have made sense to stay. There were a lot of good reasons. Many Jews in this area had served in the German army in World War I. And some speculated that the Germans would treat them favorably as a reward for their service just 25 years before. If not for a bit of what one cannot call luck, but circumstance, there would have been no choice whatsoever. The bride's father's elderly grandmother lived with her son and their family. They could, of course, never leave her behind. But 1 week before the war began, grandmother went to visit her other daughter in a nearby village. And so the family was left with an excruciating decision. Should they stay and risk being caught up in the impending chaos of war, or should they depend on their relatives' family to take care as best they could for their elderly grandmother? And now, being able to move quickly, should they flee through the doorway that circumstance had opened for them? They decided to leave. There were no vehicles. They let go of the store of the possessions in their homes and clung to what is most important, each other. Mother and father walked. The kids took turns riding on bicycles or walking. They went east, 50 kilometers in June, in the hot summer sun, until they crossed the Russian border to relative safety. They would learn later that their village was taken by the Germans on the second day of the war. His elderly grandmother, his aunt, the rest of the family were all killed. As we sat at the wedding, the bride's father explained every member of his known family could be traced to that one decision: to leave and not stay on the very first day of the war. And to that one shift of circumstance, that their elderly grandmother had gone to visit her daughter a week before the war began. As he spoke, I thought of a prayer that we sing at Tachanun on weekdays: Shomer, Shomer Yisrael, Shemor She'erit Yisrael. Guardian of Israel, guard the remnant of Israel. She'erit, what is left over. And I thought about how much every one of us is She'erit Yisrael, the remnant of Israel, the product of accident after accident, the end of a long string of luck and circumstances through Jewish history that brought us here. Whether we've chosen to be Jewish or born Jewish, we have this community. In many ways, because we have been bequeathed circumstance. I think today about how we are not here as products of our own design, but rather how lucky each and every one of us is to be here. It's fitting for us to remember. It's fitting for us to remember those who came before. The second story is not from Minneapolis or Latvia, but from Olympic National Park in Washington, where, as I mentioned on Erev Rosh Hashanah, Jennifer and I recently enjoyed a trip to celebrate our 20th anniversary. As part of our trip, we walked through the Hoh rainforest, and the park ranger explained how these temperate rainforests are home to Sitka spruce, hemlock, and Douglas fir trees, and that some of the trees in that forest grow to over 200 feet high and produce so much foliage that they block out most of the light. The forest floor can only sustain ferns and other shade-loving plants, but beneath the ferns it is so dark that scientists noticed a problem. Even if the seedlings from these giant trees were to germinate, how could they gather enough light for them to photosynthesize? Or put more simply, how is it possible that these giant trees regenerate themselves? And the answer I learned on my walk with the park ranger and my wife is something called a nurse log. When one of those huge trees falls, it turns out it clears a path of destruction, not only when it hits the ground, but clearing out part of the canopy over the forest and creating a place where more sunlight happens to get in. But it's not only that. I looked this up. In the book, The Private Life of Plants, David Attenborough explains that these giant trees reproduce themselves, quote, with the aid of their own dead bodies. The girth of an adult tree is such that the upper side of a fallen trunk remains over the ferns. A seed from a neighboring tree that lands on it can thus get sufficient light to germinate. Being perched there brings another advantage. The bark of that prostrate tree is very fibrous and holds moisture like a sponge, so the young plant does not lack for water. As the seedling sprouts, it sends down roots, and they grow over the flank of the log and down into the rich soil beneath. These stories, the story of a nurse log and the story of a Russian family and the wedding in Minneapolis, go together in my heart. Not only because I encountered both of them over the summer, but they each made me think of Yizkor. Today we remember those who came before. We remember with gratitude the miracles that we received through no merit of our own, and the decisions that those people made that brought us here, decisions made on values that we can continue. Love of the Jewish people, love of Torah, love of each other, letting go of possessions, and clinging to what's most important. We remember how much our lives are like the seedlings that grow on a nurse log, how we are nourished by the gifts of those who came before, how our lives would not be the same were it not for the sacrifices that they made. And we remember not just to recall those who are gone, but to invite them to challenge us. Can we make of ourselves a nurse log? With our lives, can we clear a path for the sun to shine? Can we gather food and water for the next generation to grow? Can we follow their example? For they gave to us a forest floor and a family and a community. 2 stories and a poem. Another one by Dana Gioia, not about trees, but about gardens and memories of times spent together with those we love. This poem is called The Lost Garden. I'll read a few stanzas. He begins, if ever we see those gardens again, the summer will be gone, at least our summer. Some other mockingbird will concertize among the mulberries, and other vines will climb the high brick wall to disappear. Gioia is right. If we do ever see gardens again, they will not be the same. Even if mockingbirds are there, there'll be some other mockingbirds singing their songs. Some other vines will climb on the wall. He continues, still thinking of you, I sometimes play a game. What if we had walked a different path one day? Would some small incident have nudged us elsewhere the way a pebble tossed into a brook might change the course 100 miles downstream? The trick is making memory a blessing. To learn by loss, subtraction of desire, of wanting nothing more than what has been. To know the past forever lost, yet seeing behind the wall a garden still in blossom. Can we make memory a blessing? We feel loss. We do. And yet, can we still see in our lives that there is a garden still in bloom? I know the temptations of grief. I know how hard it can feel to move on. I know that sometimes we feel a desire to return to the way that things were. But the trick is to make memory a blessing. and to see a garden still in bloom. Amen. If it's your custom to leave, please do quietly. In a few minutes, Eric will come forward and we'll begin the official Yizkor service. But before we do, I want to invite you to participate with me in an exercise of memory that we have done in years past to help us achieve the purposes of the Yizkor service. To feel vulnerable, connected, to remember, and perhaps to give us a chance to say some words that were left unsaid. You don't have to do this. You can sit comfortably for a few minutes, but just try not to disturb those around you. And for those who feel comfortable, I invite you to sit straight up and to place your hands on your lap and to close your eyes and to breathe in deeply through your nose and out through your mouth. And to focus on your breath, breathing in deeply through your nose and out. And to imagine yourself in a room. A comfortable room in a comfortable chair. Safe. Warm. Across from you are other chairs in the room. Across the room is a door. And you look over, and it opens. And through the door comes someone you love, who you are remembering today. Person comes in, walks across the room. You greet each other. Person sits down in the chair across from you. You're happy to see each other. You look into your loved one's eyes. You see the color. The warm smile on their face. You reach out and take their hand in yours. It's a familiar touch. After some silence, you take a moment and tell your loved one the deepest yearnings of your heart that you need to share. Words of gratitude, of apology, of love, perhaps their wisdom that you need. Perhaps others are here. You look across at the door, come in, and you take a moment to greet each one of them. Give them a hug. And share with them what you need to share. You spend some time just feeling the joy of being together. Take a moment to say a goodbye, to stand, to hug each one of your loved ones. They walk over to the door. Look at you again. And leave. When you are ready, please take a moment to open your eyes. To see the garden which is in bloom. We rise